welcome to the 56th IRMA AGM. I'm very sorry to let you know that our chair has been off sick. He informed us just a couple of weeks ago. We haven't heard anything from him recently. So I had to start doing the firefighting and fill in his position and prepare all the documents to present at the AGM. Now, if you can see here, Paul, can you go through the pages of the AGM, please?
I can do so, yeah. And anybody needs to jump in for a moment, feel free to interrupt me. First things first, I'd like to thank everyone, all ladies and gentlemen, for attending this evening. And I'd like to thank Andy for the excellent leadership he's done in stewarding us in light of obviously the unfortunate situation with Mr. Roberts. And I wish him and his family well and hope everyone gets better soon. So we're speaking today, obviously, and we're the 9th of November. Just to talk a little bit through, obviously, we have Mr. Roberts, who was our chair up until this evening. We have John Mitchell, senior experienced BCS member, who's got a lot of experience in finance over many, many years in many parts of the world, who's our treasurer. Andy Montari, our vice chair, who's again well known to many BCS members over many years. And also our other leading committee member, Durgesh, who again has performed many excellent years of service for the BCS. And my name's Paul Smith, and it's been a privilege to work with these other gentlemen over this period of time in support of all of their activities as the IRMA secretary. So moving forward, we had a recap of the 2020 to 2021 session. Obviously an exceptionally difficult year for all of us. And again, we'd like to thank everyone for attending in lieu of that. In light of obviously what happened, unfortunately, there were no London-based events. We were obviously privileged to be able to run 14 remote events. The Eventbrite booking system, I'm pleased to announce, had worked well. There's been excellent support from Swindon and the new London Copthall Avenue office. And again, you know, I've got many friends in there and they're incredible. And as you may know, all the slides and videos are available on the BCS YouTube channel to watch on any device of your choice on demand. I would respectfully invite everyone to do that as and when able, either in part or in full. And I'm privileged also to say that we now have 240 members on the LinkedIn group. Everyone is welcome to join, post and share. So just to continue, we'd like to say our special thanks to, and I apologise if I pronounced the name wrong, Pejman Kojatev, the IRMA member who's helped us with the BCI activities. We had the development of the ISO 31030 standard, travel risk management. That standard is now completed. The development, secondly, of the ISO 31000 guidance handbook, that's now completed. Thirdly, the development of the ISO 3150 risk management, guidelines for managing emerging risks to enhance resilience. Very much needed, I would suggest to you, in light of the current COVID/ post-COVID economy. Fourthly, authored the ISO technical report entitled Emerging Risk Technical Report Consideration. Fifthly, the development of the standard BS 31100 2021 risk management, the code of practice and guidance for the implementation of the applicable standards, which is now completed. Next, obviously, the development of the proposed British standard on emerging risks, which for me is very important because I've been arguing for many years that the BCS needs to take more of a leadership role. That's brilliant. And lastly, pleased to say, you know, now membering the BSI Risk Management Committee study group on project risk, and again, making a valuable thought leadership value added contribution. And again, just want to thank Mr. Pejman once again for all of his tireless efforts on behalf of everyone at IRMA. Now, just to go through a couple of things just very quickly. In terms of demographics, Africa, a region after my own heart, 10 members, Asia, 96, Europe, 40, North America, 25, that's great, Oceania, 17. So if you look at all of that, a grand total of 1,453 members, We deeply appreciate everyone's participation and contribution. And in terms of membership, the only way is up. So what I would like to do, I would like to reintroduce our treasurer, Dr. John Mitchell, to go through the treasurer's report. Dr. Mitchell, over to yourself, sir.
Thank you, Paul. One of the big challenges of being a treasurer is normally we don't have enough money for the events we're actually trying to run in London. Because we've been running everything online this year, we've actually run 3 more events than we actually planned for, but it actually hasn't cost us a penny. That's because the BCS picks up the cost of running the online meetings. So the end result was we didn't spend anything in the financial year, which means, of course, from our point of view, we've got about £1,000 to spend, but we're not allowed to spend it. But the carried over for next year has been reduced by a few £100s based on the fact that we're not going to be spending that much on our London meetings. I mean, at the moment, we still don't know when we're going to restart our London meetings. When we do that, if we decide we need more money, then I'll go back to the Finance Committee and ask them. But by and large, we're doing okay. And I think the virtual meetings have worked very well. And the fact we've run 3 more than we actually planned is a testament to people like Andy, who've been organising these things in the absence of our events organiser. I think that's about it. Let's move on.
Okay, Andy, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Thanks a lot, John. Quite a number of these virtual events were joint events by other BCS branches and SGs. So as a matter of fact, the COVID-19 pandemic had enabled us to organize more virtual events than sort of face-to-face London events.
One thing that I would jump in on the back of it, and again, I would like to endorse what Dr. Mitchell said in paying tribute to Andy's stewardage, if that's even a word, and leadership with regards to the events mantle. As some of you may know, BCS Copthall Avenue are now stopping events after 6 o'clock in the evening. Apologise if people are hearing that face-to-face from me. So again, I think it's just, again, testament to Andy's leadership and his work on the events that we've been able to hold so many. And obviously, I think there will be a standard that it will either go online only or possibly hybrid as a secondary measure moving forwards, unless and until things change. But I only found out myself when I was down there the other day.
Thank you, Paul.
Okay, so if we can move on to the next slide, if that's okay, just in deference to the time.
Please.
Okay, so if we look in terms of the governance, clearly IRMA shares the vision, the objectives of the core BCS vision, which, as everyone knows, is integrity and value and making a contribution in terms of IT's value to society, both in terms of actual contribution, academic contribution, and empowerment of people coming into the profession. We work very tirelessly, and again, a lot of this is down to Dr. Mitchell and Andy in particular, in terms of standard operating procedures, declarations of interest and understanding, maintaining risk registers, committee meetings, and for me, student chapter involvement and the website. We do everything we can to make a valid contribution in line with BCS core objectives and vision, and we try and benchmark ourselves to uphold and maintain those standards. And again, everyone else has been involved in this, Durgish and others. We deeply appreciate all the work that you've done. IRMA only functions and exists for the benefit of others because of the integrity of everyone involved. So moving forward in terms of the 2020-21 Management Committee, we were privileged to serve under the chairmanship and stewardship of Darren Roberts. I can't speak more highly of Mr. Roberts. It was a privilege to work with him. I wish him every happiness and success and prosperity moving forward to him and his family. It's been a privilege to be able to serve as the secretary and work with people of the calibre of Dr. Mitchell and Andy, who you can see on there is our deputy chair. We'd had, obviously, involvement previously from the membership secretary, Conrad, and the events organizer, Susanna. I think it would be remiss of me at this stage not to thank Conrad and Susanna in particularly for their previous contributions, not only to IRMA, but to the BCS in general. My understanding is, based upon information remitted to date, and I stand to be corrected, I don't believe they're looking to continue moving forward, which creates opportunity for other people. And obviously we have Navid, who's looking to get back involved, and obviously Durgesh, who again has served with great distinction, more to which to come in a moment. John and Andy, did you have anything you want to add before I move it forward?
Just my thanks to everyone who's been involved on the committee in a very difficult year. It's been a pleasure to serve with them.
Andy, did you have anything to say you wanted to say as well, or shall I move it forward?
No, Paul.
Okay.
Can carry on
Okay.
with the election.
Okay, yeah, I'll just move it on. Yeah. So as discussed, we're looking to do 14 remote events, ideally, if not more, moving forwards, and obviously do the GoToMeeting and the Zoom recording and use the YouTube channel, which I'm very passionate. I go on about too much, and I'm sorry, just to give everybody the opportunity to access things on demand, either in part or in full. Now, so before we move forwards to the elections, as Andy rightly said, if I can open the floor for a moment, just if anybody's got any questions, and then we can move forward to the election, if that's okay. Okay, are we moving on, Andy?
Yes, please.
Okay, so at this point, obviously we have a number of people, myself included, who would be privileged for the opportunity to be able to serve our community again moving forwards. At this point, I think it's only appropriate that I should turn this over to yourself, Andy and John, in terms of who's looking to stand, and obviously with more experience in elections than myself.
Over to you, Andy.
I'm going to continue as vice chair, and I've got a feeling that Durgesh has already put his nomination forward.
He has, sir, that's correct.
Chair.
He has, sir, that's correct.
So we've only got one application for chair then, Paul, have we?
I believe so, sir. Yes, that's correct. And it'd be a privilege to serve under Durgesh.
In that case, there's no need to have a vote on this, obviously. So I therefore suggest that we notify Durgesh as being chair as from the end of this meeting. Andy is standing as deputy chair again, and I would obviously welcome him. And I don't think there are any other application for deputy chair, are there, Paul?
Not to my knowledge, sir.
So therefore, I think Andy is nominated by default. Myself as treasurer, I'm willing to stand again. And again, I don't think there's any opposition to that. So therefore, by default, I'm elected treasurer for next year. We've had applications for academic relations from Navid. So I think for any of the positions we have on the committee, there's only one application in each case, isn't there, Paul?
That is my understanding as well, sir, yes.
Therefore, the committee is sort of elected by default, I guess.
I think again, I defer to you and Andy because of your experience on this. I think the principal role left to do as in terms of tying up the election is the appointment of applicable officers to the vacant post, or indeed the post as has become vacant, including obviously the events organizer and the other roles as touched on, and also regard to the webmaster. Presumably Durgesh would do that in conjunction with being chair. Would that be correct?
I think that's the situation.
So who Andy, you're the senior officer, or the vice chair, one of the senior officers. Who would we wish to appoint? Obviously we have Navid, and so who were we looking to fill in those other roles?
Well, we have Tony Daniel. I'm wondering if Tony would like to accept the role of the event organizer. How do you feel, Tony?
I feel a bit, shall I say, naive in the role, but I willingly try it on, and with guidance from the rest of the committee, take it forward.
Privileged to be able to work with you. I'm here to support you in any way possible, sir.
Thank you, Paul.
Okay, and what were the other roles you were looking to?
The other
fill out?
role, we have Reza Alawi, who has put a nomination for anything which is probably left over. And I think Reza Alawi, being very busy, he may fit the role of membership secretary.
I would concur that would be a very,
Conrad.
I would concur that that would be a very, very good value added opportunity. So I think that broadly would conclude the election on that basis, with that determination having been made.
We actually have two more mandatory.
sorry.
We actually have two more mandatory roles which are imposed on us by Community Board. That is the inclusion officer and the early careers
Can't hear
advocate.
anything.
I just got asked to do.
I'm not unmuted. Am I still unmuted? No. Da, 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 da.
I believe you're unmuted, sir.
Hello? Oh, my screen. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, so in terms of the two residual roles you were saying, John?
Yes, we've got the inclusion officer and the early careers advocate, which are mandatory roles on the committee. But at the moment, we don't have any applicants for those roles.
In terms of the ECA role, I've just been asked to fill that, or elected to fill that on behalf of one of the other groups. And I've been in touch with Kerry regarding the LinkedIn group for that. And obviously I've been involved in STEM and other things. I'd be happy to help with that on an interim basis if there wasn't anybody else to fulfill that, if it would solve a problem for anybody.
I could bite your arm off for that, actually, Paul. That'd be great.
I'm always here to try and help people. So that would leave the one residual role. Again, I open it to the floor.
Paul, everybody, I'll be happy to take on the additional role of communication and social media.
Brilliant.
Still
I
leaves,
understand that we have a candidate.
still leaves us with the inclusion officer.
That's right.
Well, if we can't do it, we can't do it. Just to tell Community Board.
Well, I mean, I'm happy to. I've been involved in so much diversity training as a serving councillor. I forget the hours of PQE that I got logged in, and I actually got put in as a liaison officer with the GRT community. Having made a presentation that digging ditches was not the best way to liaise with different ethnic groups. So again, with the amount of training that I've got, I'd be more than happy to act in an interim capacity if it would help the committee.
Well, Paul, that would be absolutely great. However, there's a bit of a challenge here because according to the Community Board, these mandatory roles, such as early careers advocate and inclusion officer, cannot be held with any other portfolio.
Oh, I didn't know that.
However, as you only do it on an interim basis, we'll gladly accept your you volunteering on an interim basis, and we'll have to try and sort something out to get a permanent person in place.
Absolutely. Great. So I think unless we're now 8:25 by my clock nearly, I think unless anyone's got any questions, we can do a formal introduction to our speaker and then turn the floor over to the gentleman in question. Would that be okay?
That's fine, Paul.
Okay, brilliant.
So we're concluding the AGM at 18:25.
Brilliant. So without further ado, what I would like to do as the senior officer present, I'd like to turn the meeting over to Andy to introduce our speaker. And I would like to thank everyone for listening to me for 25 minutes, because I know it's not easy. Thank you. Andy, the floor is yours, sir, to introduce the speaker.
Okay. We are honored to have Rashik, MBE, FBCS, IBM Fellow, and Vice President Technology of Europe, Middle East, and Africa as our speaker tonight. We used to have traditionally BCS president to speak to us on our AGM. We had John Higgins last year, so it was not appropriate to ask John to come and talk to us again. I contacted the deputy president, Mayak Pakash, and he kindly told us that he has got other engagement and he cannot attend, and introduced us to Rashik. We're very honored to have Rashik, and you probably have noticed there was a link in the invitation form to Rashik website showing the papers that he has presented so far. And we are in a position to welcoming him as our speaker this evening. So over to you, Rashik.
Thanks, Andy, and thanks everybody for giving me the opportunity to share some perspectives. What I thought I would talk about today is why we need responsible computing. And to do that, and by the way, it's not just a talk. I'm more than happy. There's a small enough group of us here to have a conversation. So it's not just me claiming to have any monopoly on knowledge or wisdom in this space. This is based on the work that I've been doing for a number of years now, both within IBM and what you may not be aware of. I also chair the Fellows Technical Advisory Group that was formed earlier this year with the BCS. And I have various other positions outside IBM. So I'm part of the LEP board in Leeds, where I chair the Employment Skills Panel. So there's a range of roles that I've drawn these set of insights from. And so let's get into this kind of material that I've prepared for the conversation. And it starts really by thinking through what are the primary forces that are driving the change that we see in society at the moment. And the first one is no surprise to anybody. You know, I'm actually at COP26 at the moment, so I'm up in Glasgow, and climate emergency is top of mind for everybody that's obviously attending, but it's also top of mind around the world as we look at a kind of existential crisis for mankind and humanity as we know it, and trying to keep the temperature to plus 1.5 degrees, which is critical to our survival. And in that space, you know, IT has a role to play, computing has a role to play, and we've got to really think through what is that role, right? The second piece is, of course, as we come out of the pandemic, the world of work is dramatically different. What the expectations are from individuals, employees, employers has changed. And one of the challenges that we see across organizations, whether they are volunteer organizations or commercial or governmental organizations, they're all challenged with how do we attract the best talent, how we retain that talent, motivate them. And then, of course, the piece that from a computing perspective, we all have to think through and be mindful of is digitization. Digitization has been the foundation of what computing has done for the last 70 or so years. And it's really been there about increasing the performance and reducing the cost of IT as we know it. So these three forces come together. And I argue that in the middle of those three forces is actually responsible computing. And I'll kind of uncover what I mean by responsible computing more in a few minutes. so let's start with the climate emergency piece. And I suspect everybody's very, very well aware of this. The result of human activity, we've increased the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. That's driven global warming, that's driving climate change, and that has tremendous impact on the physical and biological world. And that has then got to a point now where it has human societal impact. And you see that from things like the ice caps melting to some of the phenomenal and terrifying fires that we see, flooding in different parts of the world, drought in other parts of the world. And at the moment, the current estimates say 150 billion per year is the cost of some of these atrocities and these events happening in the world. At the same time, we're seeing increased humanity facing hunger. So 100 million plus people facing hunger in the world today. And as you kind of think through that some more, you can start to see the situation is not getting better. The situation, if anything, is getting worse. And so we've got to do things that make a difference. And through the last week, through COP26, we saw a whole bunch of pledges from a policy perspective, from an investor perspective, consumer, and society. So we are stepping up, and humanity is starting to respond to that. But there's still a lot more to be done. And so IT's role is something that we need to think through some more, and we've got to really sort of be clear on how can IT and computing not just be greener or more mindful of the impact it has on the planet and the environment. It should also have a bigger role. So let's kind of think through that some more. But let's just think a little bit about the world of work and where we see the world of work going. And this really, for me, is summarized in one really simple slide, which says, as we think about the world of work going forward, we see tremendous change. Firstly, we're thinking of jobs that didn't exist before, right? The notion of an Uber driver didn't exist. The notion of a cyber analyst didn't exist. So there's many roles that are completely new, and they will continue to evolve in a rapid way. And what we now see a lot of people talking about is we went through the Industrial Revolution, we've been through the digitization revolution, and we're now into the sustainability revolution. And that sustainability revolution is really about driving business and society in a way which moves us towards much clearer outcomes, and those outcomes help create a much more sustainable world. That work itself is unpredictable, because as we start to move forward, the systems and environment that we rely on is interconnected in ways that we don't fully understand. And so the actual work itself is unpredictable as we start to unpick that and then unpick that to build the new sustainable business models that will support us. And in doing that, the working practice that we have are also changing dramatically. So we're in a much more agile, more responsive working environment. We're much more data driven and much more data savvy in how we do that. And there's a heavy dose of creativity in all aspects of what we do. But the people that are doing that work are really being very mindful of the values that matter to them. Right? They want to do things that work that is meaningful to them. They want to see that they're contributing in a way which moves the needle in the right way in terms of metrics. And they do want to create a more inclusive world where people can fully realize the potential. And so for me, this kind of summarizes what we think of as the future of work, and organizations that step up to doing this is more likely to attract the right kind of talent. They're more likely to be sustainable. They're more likely to really unlock the latent potential of their employees in a much more effective way. So that's all good. So from a climate change perspective, we know computing is a role to play. We haven't really talked about that, but there's something that we need to understand. But that's a force that we have to respond to. The world of work, and as you think about a lot of this is also very much computing led. But the heart of that, of course, is enabled by the notion of digitization. And as you think about digitization, I've tried to simplify digitization into some very simple laws. And what I describe here there are three fundamental laws of digitization. And the first one is kind of blindingly obvious. It says, whatever can be digitized will be. Might sound obvious, but actually it's an important thing to think about. That means that, whatever you think about the world as we know it, the world of work, the world of the business of living, the aspects of that will continually get digitized. And the first to digitize that actually has an important advantage. Now, the second law is the one that most people don't want to talk about, but it's actually fundamental to what's happening here. And that is that as you go through digitization, whatever you apply digitization to leads towards becoming free. And of course, that's the frightening thing, that where there was value before, the nature of digitization is that takes value out and it reduces the cost to a point where it ultimately becomes free. And you see that with many of the kind of things that we take for granted. The fact that we can almost have zero cost video conferencing around the world is a result of the digitization that's taken place in many aspects of the kind of video photography type world, right? But what's really interesting is the data that gets produced by the act of digitization is the pathway to create new value. It's what you do with that data that really makes a difference. And therein lies a challenge, which is, of course, we don't know how that data is going to be used, and we don't know how to really apply that data. And that's really why I try to spend time trying to distill that down into some very simple models again. And what we found here was there are really 5 very simple models, and we published this in a Harvard Business Review paper back in 2014, thinking that this was kind of new news, and it was kind of new news, but that's been the mainstay for a number of years. And even recently, I was challenged that there's a 6th model here, but the reality is that any other models tend to be one of these 5. So let me just unpack these 5 models so you can understand. The first model of digitization is by taking any physical product. Once that product leaves the factory gates today, the manufacturer essentially loses contact with that product. But through augmentation of that product with sensors and connectivity, we're able to maintain connection with that product. And so we can start to think about that product not just in the manufacturing cycle, but in the field, so to speak, right? And that usage allows us to then do all kinds of things and that's enabled through things like edge technologies, 5G, IoT, some of the robotics capabilities, applying AI, cloud, some open source technologies, a whole bunch of things. Sensors and connectivity are obviously an essential part of that. And so if I take as a really simple example, the aero engine, as it was manufactured many years ago, there was no connectivity to that. There's no way of understanding how that airline engine would be running. But what Rolls-Royce did is they put sensors and connectivity in, and they took this basic pattern and they transformed that from being a simple selling you an engine or selling an aircraft manufacturer an engine into what's referred as power by the hour. And that's well understood in the industry and has been done for many years. But that transformation, that business model, was made possible by augmenting the aero engine with those sensors. Similarly, we see the transformation of mobility. So the vehicle becomes an intelligent vehicle, and you can see more and more of that coming along as we add more and more assistance to that, the connected vehicle. We see the emergence of connected appliances, connected home. The list is almost endless, but that's a big part of where we see digitization really sort of transforming things. And in essence, it's taking a product and turning it into a service. The second pattern is any activity that humans perform will gradually get more and more digitized, right? And so we talk about digitization of process or digitized process. And here we're building intelligent workflows, creating natural interfaces, chatbots, RPAs, and so on. And to give you an example here, so in the midst of the pandemic last year, we were able to build Agnieszka, which is a chatbot which would answer all the questions for citizens of the Czech Republic. And as the COVID rules continually changed, like they did everywhere else in the world, Agnieszka was able to answer any question that citizens had. And it was taking all the best advice and distilling that in a way which was useful to everybody. And so that was made possible by this notion of kind of digitization process. So the kind of call center interface was turned into a chatbot and made very easily possible. And there's a range of other these kind of services going forward. And the third pattern is one of looking at inefficiencies across organizational boundaries. Assess the world. There's various economists around the world identified there is something like $4 trillion wasted through inefficiencies, and so by creating a trusted data source across those organization boundaries, you can create a blockchain and blockchain type technologies, and you start to remove that wastage. The fourth pattern, in essence, says any data that you have is a tradable asset. And so things like mobile phone providers taking the mobile phone trajectory and speed and overlaying that on a map allows that to then become a high resolution traffic data, become a tradable asset. And the final pattern says creating a digital twin of any real world allows you to create complete new interaction patterns, create complete new value. And so these 5 patterns kind of underpin what we see as the evolution of digitization. Now, what we also did was we started to look at what are the priorities people see from that digitization, and we really summarized it as 3 things. We see that as firstly using digitization to survive and keep that business surviving, and that might be reducing the costs, increasing the business processes, and so on, increasing the speed of those processes. The second real focus is simplification. Businesses are realizing, organizations are realizing that the evolution of IT has got to a point where huge complexity not just from the investments they've made, but complexity from a supply chain perspective, from a regulatory perspective, and the ability to simplify that is kind of fundamental. And the final piece is organizations are really looking at innovation and experimentation to identify something that would give them a competitive advantage. And then once they've got that, want to super scale that through society. And so in our work talking to CTOs, we found that actually there are some fundamental technology decisions that CTOs and CIOs are making, and they're summarizing here. So clients and organizations are saying, I need to use one of these 7 aspects to really help us identify where we should place our investments. And I won't go through that, but you can see there's a link to that. So if anybody's interested, you can follow the link and get more details on this later. But really, what this digitization has also done is really accelerate and amplify the need for AI. And one of the kind of hidden aspects that we don't often think enough about is, well, what's the environmental impact of that AI and of that computing? There's the evolution of AI from a period from 2012 to 2018 saw a 300,000 times increase in the compute workload for those AI workloads, and that gives us massive challenge. So part of what we're trying to do here is also trying to understand how do we create some metrics and ability to compare different AI models and AI solutions to understand their green credentials, if you like, and try and find more efficient, effective ways. And the challenge then is, of course, can we use different models? So could we use quantum type techniques? Could we use lower precision technologies? Could we use analog techniques? And these are all issues that I think from an IT industry we need to understand more of. And so part of this drove us towards saying, actually, there's something that's much bigger here. And through the CTO interviews, we started to see a set of anxieties that organizations had. And we started to distill some of the best practices we had within the IBM company, and also with partners like NatWest and KPMG and so on. And what we started to see was, well, actually, there are 6 domains of being much more responsible that we need to build. And the first one comes and starts by saying, what does a responsible data center actually look like? How do we understand the environmental impact that has? How do we start to minimize that environmental impact and be mindful of responsibilities of running that data center? It's not just about providing the IT and computing capability, but that whole circularity of that is kind of key. And then within that data center, how do we think about what responsible infrastructure looks like, and how do we make sure that that infrastructure is provided in the right kind of way? And then the code that we write on that, what does responsible code look like? Do we understand the carbon footprint of our code? Do we understand just how secure it is, and what kind of vulnerabilities that it creates? The data itself, some of the work that we've done here, the data, we've seen 100 copies of the same data for lots of various reasons. And the question is that efficient? Is that effective? Right? And when it comes to responsible systems, so how do we make sure that those systems are ethical, they're explainable, they're appropriate? And just because we can doesn't mean that we should. And then ultimately, are we driving those systems to provide the right kind of impact? So are those systems helping us become more sustainable? Are those systems helping us understand where the opportunities are to drive down some of the environmental risks and so on, or the environmental impact that the business has? And so this responsible computing framework gives us a way of thinking through what the opportunity is as an organization to be much more efficient in that environment. What this slide does here is give you a bit more explanation of each of the elements of that framework, and these what we find is these are all interlinked. So once you start working on infrastructure that has tentacles into data use, into systems and impact, so each of these, it's not standalone. There are linkages, but we can start to look at these as cross-cutting themes like climate or ethics or natural uses of natural resources. And it's quite a powerful way of thinking through the impact that IT has on society at large. And so as you start to think through this some more, you say, okay, well, that's all good, but how do I engage my employees? How do I engage my workforce in this space? And so the manifesto that we've built, and we're partnering now with OMG to make this much more widely available, is a valuable way of engaging with people. So the manifesto provides some very simple principles, and having tested that with a number of organizations, it's resonating very well. And so from a BCS perspective, I think there's an opportunity here where we can step up and really lead to say this is the right kind of, when we think about making IT good for society, is this something that the BCS might want to adopt and use more widely? And so if I look at some of the examples of work that we've been doing here, working with one of the banks in a very simple way, which is just to be very clear on what are the greenhouse gases that are emerging from the organization itself, and the data that we're surfacing. So the use of IT, if you like, to start with, has been very simple in providing some clarity on what that data is. And you can show how that data is being, how that greenhouse gas is emitted from a kind of scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 within the business itself. So whether it's direct, whether it's indirect, or kind of other impact that they're trying to understand. In the same way, when you look at the journey, most organizations are looking at some level of migration to the cloud, and using techniques such as using this cloud advisor tool that we've created here provides a way of assessing where you are today from an IT perspective and quantifying the current carbon footprint of your IT, looking at how you might consolidate that and doing the what ifs to look at potential savings, both from a monetary perspective and from an environmental perspective, and then looking at transformation, how that transformation works, and then ultimately how you might get towards being much more of a sort of cloud native organization, and at the same time also playing your part in being much more sustainable. And so all these things really sort of come together to give us a framework for thinking through some of these issues. But one of the biggest challenges we face, of course, is once services are on the cloud, trying to understand really what is the carbon footprint of my part of that cloud is really hard. So one of the pieces that our research colleagues have been working on is a carbon accounting in reduction engine, where we can actually calculate every piece of code that's related to this particular service that you're using, this API on the cloud, and give you an accurate calculation of what is the carbon footprint of that aspect compared to the other parts. And so this gives you a good way of understanding where you are today, and then continue to improve. And that's all being built and designed in compliance with the greenhouse gas protocols that have been agreed. And so this gives us a nice framework to think through this. But then you start to say, well, what about the infrastructure and how responsible we can be with the infrastructure? And I know lots of organizations have been trying to be much more circular in the use of those technologies and find more efficient ways of using those technologies. But that's not something that's unusual, right? So if we look at some more of the traditional technology like IBM's ON Z platform, the typical part for an IBM Z system will last between 8 to 12 years. Now, the question is, why can't we apply that also to commodity servers? Why can't we apply those same kind of techniques to other sets of technologies and be much more mindful of that? So the whole process of from manufacturing to distribution, through to the actual usage and parts management, to the collection of that, the scrapping of that, and recycling of that, and not just scrapping it, but also then bringing that back into the manufacturer and reforming that into new forms of future technology. And that's all possible if we think about this as a kind of circular economy around the infrastructure. There are other examples which are more complete, which start to look at the ways in which an organization can use the kind of responsible computing ideas to think through, how am I using my data, right? So things like, are my developers being effective and efficient in the use of that data? Am I minimizing the storage for that? Do I have the right infrastructure to support that business? Have I baked ethics and legality into this? And am I applying data to be really good for society? And that's actually the work that we're doing with some of the energy providers across Europe. And again, that's been proving really helpful in helping them be much more effective in managing the risks of the business, improving their own resilience, but also thinking through things like optimization of crew schedules and dispatching, which also then has a huge knock-on effect in being much more sustainable. So the role of computing in this whole sustainability journey is actually one that's really, really valuable. And as we think about this, and as I said, we've been doing this for a few years now, there are some common pitfalls which people fall into. So have I really thought through my baseline, and have I got a pretty clear baseline to work from? A lot of this is missing, and the kind of rule of thumb calculations are not there. And when it comes to making changes, whether it's moving infrastructure around or moving applications around, some of the dependency mapping can be a real challenge. And so trying to make sure that we find a way of managing that in an effective way. And the biggest hurdle here we find, of course, overcoming inertia. This is often a cultural change. And so making sure that you do this in a way which is authentic to the business and embedding that into the manager system is kind of fundamentally important. And so, you know, as you think through this, you know, I would urge everybody to think hard about how we as IT professionals both take our own journey and help our organizations to take this journey, because you know, computing has a massive role to play, not just in being much more sustainable in itself, which is what this whole story is about in terms of responsible computing, but also being the insight into how the business can become much more sustainable, and using these kind of techniques, you know, responsible impact type techniques to help us really have a much broader impact on helping us create a more sustainable world. And so what I see is that organizations around the world are really looking for a responsible computing provider and responsible computing professionals. And I think that's really the opportunity that BCS has here is how do we help guide and enable our BCS members to be exemplars for responsible computing professionals, and how can they step up to really help businesses in the UK and really sort of help them be leaders in this space as we start to re-emerge as a much more sustainable and environmentally aware organization. So with that, there's a bunch of thoughts I've kind of shared here, and I think there's a tremendous opportunity which aligns very much with the BCS's own mission of making IT good for society. And as a kind of information risk management and assurance specialist group, I would hope that you would all find this valuable as a way of thinking about how we can all step forward and play our part in creating a much more responsible computing environment for our society. So with that, Andy, I'm going to hand back to you. If you've got questions or comments or suggestions here.
Any questions?
Well, I'd like to make a comment. And first of all, thank you very much for a really thought-provoking and interesting presentation there, Rashik. I was intrigued by your comment, which is really about obsolescence and how long bits of an IBM Z series last, and your comparison with x86. And it kind of struck home to me because I've just upgraded one of my PCs to Windows 11 and find that Microsoft are really not allowing me to do Windows 11 upgrade for anything that's over 3 years old because of the requirement for generations of processors. And in a way, this is part of the problem that we have, this incredible amount of obsolescence. So I'm kind of with you with that. I wonder if you have a solution.
So I don't have an easy answer to that. So I actually, my main workstation at home is a Linux workstation for that very reason. And the workstation I'm running is actually a 2012 PC, which runs perfectly well, running the software that I want to run, and I don't seem to have any issues. So I think there are different ways around this. But as we move towards more cloud-based services, and more and more can be done using your simple Chrome OS type device, you start to have a much longer lived set of capabilities. The issue, of course, is the business models that these organizations are dependent on. Ones that push you towards obsolescence of technologies in a much shorter timescale, and that's what we've got to try and get out of. How do we create new business models which will not have that kind of a cycle? And to a certain extent, Microsoft is doing that through things like Office 365, which is now a service subscription based, and so they have a subscription based pricing model, which I would hope lend itself more to being much more sustainable. So not an easy one, Mike. I don't have an easy magic wand on that, but it's certainly something that we need to think hard about. And as consumers, we've got to play our part in how do we vote with our wallets on what we think is appropriate for our society and our world going forward.
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
Any more questions?
I think they've all got bored and run away, Andy.
No more questions?
She wants to come off mute.
Yeah, just a quickie. You talked a lot about the responsible data center and the use of cloud. How easy is it going to be to get our cloud providers to provide the information as to what your carbon footprint is? Or is that just wishful thinking that they'll actually do it?
So part of the reason that I'm pushing with Open Object Management Group rather to build this an open standard is to do exactly that. So we have some very positive noises from Microsoft, from Dell, and AWS that they want to be part of this consortium we're trying to build. I think if we can get that landed, then we will see some real action. I mean, today it's almost not even possible to imagine how we'd solve it. But in the last, I would say, 3 months, there's been quite a bit of progress. And I think everybody is now trying to step up and figure out what we should do as an IT industry. So if we can get this right, I think there's a lot more hope. And as I say, Object Management Group is actually a good organization. We looked at Linux Foundation, we looked at some of the other open groups, open organizations, but it needs to be an open initiative if this is going to really succeed. It's something that the IT industry needs, and things like COP26, where most of the big IT vendors are there in strong numbers, in big numbers. So I think this is going to be forced on the IT organizations if they don't step up and do it soon.
Thank you.
So my comment to that about data centers and so forth, again, perhaps I'm cynical, but your slides on AI and the increasing amount of computer power that's involved in both training and inference, it almost seemed to me at one time that the main reason why the cloud providers were pushing AI was because it was a wonderful money earner. That the more people you could get on that, the more cores and memory they could use. And a typical comment was, well, we were able to use 496 cores and only 26 terabytes of main memory to do this training. So that is a real problem. And I don't know what the solution is.
Yes, so it goes back partly to the business model, but also partly to the value that you're trying to create here. So I'll give you a real example. So one of the applications that we're working with one of the UK banks, the initial application itself was using something the order of 1,000 cores to do the machine learning and the creation of the model. We spent about 2 months looking at the process, and at the end of that, we reduced the compute footprint by a factor of 25, simply by looking at what data they were using, and having the right data sets for the learning makes a massive difference. Having 500 copies of the same kind of data isn't going to improve the fidelity of your model. It's just calculation for calculation's sake, right? So by doing some thoughtful work on the data part of it, you get a huge saving. And then once you've got the model itself, there are things that you can do to really understand what the AI is telling you and then optimize it. So combining that with symbolic AI along with the kind of inferred AI gives you another set of benefits. And so we were able to get huge impact in that whole process by just applying what we would have thought of as fairly well understood data management and modeling techniques. Unfortunately, that's not done commonly. And so part of what we're trying to do with responsible computing is surface some of the best practices. By having those values, we would think that the professional will start asking for the insights from the best practices, and then start to adopt some of these. So we start to get the changes in a much more systemic way from a grassroots level. And I think the BCS has a big role to play in promoting and sharing those. Part of the work that we're trying to do with the FTAG is to be able to distill these best practices again and share it much more widely with BCS.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
it's likely in the future, we're likely in the future that we'll actually regulatory requirements to report the excessive amount of energy consumption that we're using for compute companies, private companies, enterprises.
I'm sorry, I really struggled to understand that. I don't know whether it was just me or whether others struggled to understand what Andy was saying. Alan was saying that.
Yeah, I was just wondering. Yeah, I was just wondering if in the future that we think in the future that we may be required as part of regulations, to report on our footprint, like the amount of energy that we use, the amount of energy that we're running systems, compute, or data centers, etc.
Yeah, I think we're in early days in this. I suspect that will become more and more mainstream. So, for example, we've already seen in procurements some of the government organisations, some of the health providers are asking vendors to talk about their carbon footprint of code, of systems, of cloud services. So I think this is coming, and it's a fairly early stage at the moment. But I would expect to see more and more of that as time progresses. So yeah, it's going to become more mandated, more normal as the whole sustainability topic becomes top of mind for senior business leaders and government leaders.
Any more questions? Well, if we don't have any more questions, I would like to thank Rashik for his very interesting, thought-provoking presentation. There are a lot of things that needs to be considered as we are dealing with information risk management and assurance. One question I have for Rashik is that the COVID-19 pandemic had caused a hell of a lot of money to the business all throughout the world. Now, what if we're going to have a new virus coming from China or somewhere else every 10 years? How prepared are we, and what we can do in order to learn lessons from past mistakes made by governments all over the world because they were not prepared to deal with this pandemic?
So and a great question, and I don't think I'm well qualified enough to be able to give you a complete answer here. I mean, I would say that it was very clear that all governments and organizations around the world were not ready for the scale or the severity of the pandemic as we face right now. And many will claim that they have learned the lessons and they're ready. I fear that that's a long way from true. I think that you will see, if we were to see another pandemic in 10 years' time, I would not be surprised if there was an equal level of surprise and unexpected disruption on the way of people's lives once again. And it comes back to overcoming inertia. Right? Part of this is there is an ingrained inertia of how we live our lives and how businesses work and how governments drive impact. And whilst the pandemic's on, we think we've put things in place, but we don't really test those until the next pandemic. So I think it's just preparation for the next pandemic, and then we will improve a little bit again. Is it going to be better than today? Yes, it will be slightly better than today. Is it going to be as good as we would want? Absolutely not. I mean, that's just my personal opinion, though. Right?
Thank you. Well, if we don't have any more questions, then I would like to thank Rashik for his time and his very interesting presentation. And announce that the meeting is now over.
And if I can just say, if anybody wants to follow up or got further questions, please do feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or Twitter or any of the common social media channels. You'll find my email address. And Andy, I'm happy to share the slides. So if people want to have the slides as links to other blogs and articles I've written, so you can follow up and see some of the additional data as well.
Yes, thanks very much. The video of this presentation will be available within a week or two, and the slides will also be available for so BCS members. It'll be on. It will be in the form of a link on the actual event flyer.
Okay, thank you everybody. I hope you have a good rest of the day, and look forward to continuing to collaborate, and let's try and make a more responsible IT environment for all, and step up to being the responsible IT professionals that society needs.
Thank you, Rashid.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
There you go.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Andy,
Yes.
we've been touching next week or so with the SOPs and that to take on the role of the events organizer to me.
Well, it looks like this is a role which is currently vacant, and
Yeah,
I thought,
no, I understand that. And I'm happy to take it on and do, Andy.
yeah,
I just want to get into the administration side of it so that I can actually start to try and plan things, because obviously I've been out of the loop for a while.
right.
So I need to get back into things, the workspaces where all the documents now are, just to start doing things.
Well, what's going to happen immediately is that the people who have volunteered for these roles, they are going to have access to the base camp.
Okay.
And all our documents and the role governance documentation for each role is on Basecamp. Therefore, you'll be able to have a look, download the sort of SOP and risk register for event organizer on the Basecamp, and go through it and sort of familiarize yourself. Maybe one advantage that we have compared with all other SGs and branches is that all our committee roles have been documented, and they are actually updated quarterly. And if we have sort of a newcomer going through a role by studying the SOP, and they find that there are some shortcomings, they would actually amend that and create a new version of it and upload it, and that would be available. So in this respect, we have sort of skill sharing on the committee, which allows so one person to pick up another role without really going through an induction, by just going and reading the SOP.
Yep.
And familiarizing themselves with the task involved in that role. If there is no changes in the SOP, that is, there is no additional activities added to the SOP, that means that the risk register remains unchanged. And all we do is we update the date of the documents from one quarter to another quarter. But if we feel that there are some things to be added or some things to be deleted, then the new version will be created, and this new version will replace the old version, and everyone will be informed through the base camp. So what I will be doing would be giving the names of the people who have volunteered for these roles to Kerry. Kerry is not going to be in the office tomorrow, Wednesday, but she'll be there on Thursday, and hopefully she'll be able to place these names against the roles with the BCS email address for the new role holder, and then you will be having, you know, sort of a link sent to you for accessing the base camp, and your name would appear on the base camp against the role of events organizer, and the same thing will happen with other roles.
Yes, Magic. Thanks, Andy.
No problem.
Andy, just want to say goodbye to you.
Thanks very much indeed, Pejman, for all the work that you have been doing as our representative on BSI. It's great work, and I think very essential.
Thank you.
Without standards, we are really lost and we can't get anywhere.
And you can always communicate with me regarding standards, Andy.
Right.
All right, take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. Take care. Bye.